Released in 2001, Band of Brothers' popularity has remained strong over the years, with younger audiences discovering it for the first time on streaming services like Netflix. The series' realism, combined with its gripping story of Easy Company, has resulted in many viewers to still regard it as being the best World War II miniseries ever made. In this video, I'm going to reveal 10 surprising things that you didn't know about Band of Brothers. Number 10. The enormous cost to make the miniseries was unheard of at the time. Back when it was released in 2001, HBO's Band of Brothers was the most expensive miniseries ever made, with a total budget of around $125 million, which translates to about $12.5 million per episode. It also had a marketing budget of an additional $15 million, bringing the grand total to $140 million. Though today, series like Game of Thrones and The Rings of Power easily surpass that, this was unheard of in 2001. The most expensive miniseries up until that point was 1983's The Winds of War, a television adaptation of Herman Wouk's World War II novel that cost about $35 million to make, or $67 million when adjusted for inflation in 2001, the year of Band of Brothers' release. Still, this was far less than Band of Brothers' budget. Why was Band of Brothers so costly? In addition to the heavy cost of constructing numerous period-accurate sets, the production used 2,000 American and German military uniforms, 1,200 vintage civilian costumes, employed over 10,000 extras, acquired hundreds of period-authentic weapons, and at times used as much as 14,000 rounds of ammunition per day. They also built 6 tanks for the shoot and rented 4. The first 3 episodes of Band of Brothers used more pyrotechnics than all of Saving Private Ryan. On average, the production used 700 pounds of explosives per episode. Band of Brothers would eventually lose its title of most expensive miniseries 9 years later when its counterpart, The Pacific, was released in 2010, which cost over $217 million to produce. Both would eventually be eclipsed by none other than 2024's Masters of the Air, their spiritual successor, which had a budget of $250 to $300 million and was also produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. Number 9. The cast attended a grueling 10-day boot camp. If you're going to spend $125 million on a World War II miniseries, the actors better look like they know what they're doing. That's where decorated Marine and Vietnam veteran Captain Dale Dye came in, who was the senior military advisor on the series and led the actors in an intense 10-day boot camp. If you recognize Captain Dale Dye, that's because he's also an actor and he portrays Colonel Robert Sink in the series. The bulk of the boot camp was held at the British Army's Longmoor Camp, a military training area in Hampshire. While the actors said that the boot camp experience helped them form a bond that made them feel more like a real unit, some handled the initial mental and physical toll of the experience better than others. Let's listen to what actor Scott Grimes, who portrays Tech Sergeant Don Malarkey, had to say about the initial day at boot camp.
You hit walls in boot camp. You hit these personal, mental, physical walls that you have to go over, basically. There were guys the first night at boot camp that cried themselves to sleep, that I was there for, and they were there for me.
Actor Richard Speight Jr., who portrays Skip Muck in Band of Brothers, recalled his reaction to the first day of boot camp.
You're in barracks with a bunch of guys you've never met, and the barracks smell like feet. I remember laying in bed that night going, I'm never going to make this. I'm never going to make this 10 days.
Rick Warden, who portrays Harry Welsh in the series, said that as of 2022, he was still wrestling with the effects of boot camp. "We all had a tough time," said Warden. "I had a time I'm still processing." Not all of the actors had that rough of a time at boot camp. When Rich Eisen asked Michael Fassbender about the boot camp, he said it was a lot of fun. He said his biggest worry was not going to the bathroom before going out to train and having to do it in the woods by grabbing hold of a tree for leverage. The exhaustive 18-hour days of boot camp were filled with physical training and military drills and maneuvers. They were also put through 1940-style jump training at Royal Air Force Base Brize Norton. This included jumping from a 40-foot-high mock-up of a plane fuselage. Dale Dye explained the purpose of putting the actors through the boot camp.
The idea was that when they began to portray something, when the director said, "You're exhausted," or the director said, "You're frightened," they would have something that could reach back and touch, some sort of understanding of what exhaustion means to a soldier, what fear means to a soldier. I wanted them to know that sort of thing, and there's just no way to do it without putting them in that position.
At the end of the 10-day boot camp, Dale Dye pinned jump wings on each actor who completed the camp. If you want an inside look at the boot camp experience from the perspective of the actors, Ron Livingston, who portrays Captain Lewis Nixon, was given the task of shooting a video diary during boot camp, which can be found on YouTube. Interestingly, on the first day of the camp, Livingston was ordered to put away the camera by one of the drill sergeants who was unaware that HBO had asked Livingston to shoot the diary. Number 8. More than half of the cast was British. Despite Band of Brothers depicting the American military unit Easy Company during World War II, more than 50% of the actors in the series are British. This includes the majority of the 10,000 extras and more than half of the 500 actors with speaking roles. One of those actors is none other than Damian Lewis, who portrays Richard Winters, the character at the center of the series. Other British actors include Dexter Fletcher, Mark Warren, Stephen Graham, Simon Pegg, Tom Hardy, James McAvoy, Shane Taylor, and Matthew Leach. I was a bit surprised to learn that Ross McCall, who portrays Joseph Liebgott in the series, is also a British actor.
And these kids were from farms, so they weren't paratrooping guys, They were trained to do this, and they just wanted to be the best. They wanted to look the best. They wanted to do their job the best.
Credit to all of these actors for doing an amazing job pulling off American accents. One big reason for the outsized number of British actors is that Band of Brothers was filmed in the UK, primarily on a large back lot in Hatfield, England. That leads me to the next mind-blowing fact about Band of Brothers. It was shot almost entirely on a single set on an 1,100-acre backlot in Hatfield in Hertfordshire, England. The 12-acre village set was continually modified to depict 11 different European towns in Band of Brothers. So the next time you watch the series, keep in mind that as Easy Company is moving across Europe, encountering towns in England, France, Holland, Belgium, Germany, and Austria, the actors are actually on the same backlot in England that's been modified to depict each town. The backlot in Hatfield had also been used for Saving Private Ryan. However, the Band of Brothers set was about 5 times larger. Number 6. Bastogne was filmed indoors with fake snow. When the series takes us to the vicinity of Bastogne, Belgium, the men not only try to hold off the massive German force from overtaking them, but also the bitter cold, which is another constant threat. While the actors in Band of Brothers do a great job depicting men who are on the verge of freezing to death, you might be surprised to learn that the episode was actually shot indoors using fake snow. The massive indoor set was constructed inside a giant airplane hangar at the Hatfield Aerodrome. Hundreds of real trees and 250 fiberglass trees were used to recreate the forest, with the fiberglass trees often being combined with hemp and latex to make it look like they'd been blown apart by German shelling. Lightweight foam tops were put on some of the trees so that they could come crashing down after being hit, and the foam top is what you see falling to the ground. An estimated 1/3 pounds of paper was used to make the snow seen throughout the Band of Brothers episode Bastogne. It was mixed with plastics to create a variety of snow, from flakes to slush. It took 4 weeks to dress the entire indoor set with snow. Kudos to Band of Brothers for making viewers practically feel the numbing cold that the real soldiers experienced. The next time you rewatch the series, notice that we mostly don't see the actors' breaths because they were primarily on an indoor set for the episode. Number 5. The cast was littered with actors who went on to become major stars. Given how high-profile Band of Brothers was, and the fact that it was being produced by Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, and HBO, virtually every young male actor wanted to be part of it. And if you go back and rewatch Band of Brothers, you'll recognize a number of young actors who went on to become some of the biggest names in the business. This includes Tom Hardy, James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Simon Pegg, Jimmy Fallon, Damian Lewis, and Ron Livingston. Ron Livingston and Jimmy Fallon were somewhat known at the time, with Livingston having starred in 1999's Office Space and Fallon being in the middle of his tenure on Saturday Night Live. A number of other Band of Brothers actors, though they didn't become major stars, went on to find success in the business. This includes actors like Stephen Graham, Andrew Scott, Jason O'Mara, and Colin Hanks. Michael Cudlitz landed a starring role on AMC's The Walking Dead. Ian Bailey also found success in television, starring in shows like Once Upon a Time and the MGM horror series From. Number 4. The actors are firing authentic World War II era guns. The production acquired 700 period authentic weapons, including numerous M1 Garand rifles, which the actors can be seen firing in Band of Brothers. The M1 Garand was standard issue for U.S. paratroopers at the time, and it's the most prominent rifle featured in the series. To give you an idea of the cost of acquiring that many rifles, if you wanted to buy a single World War II era M1 Garand rifle today, it would cost you anywhere from $1,500 to over $5,000, depending on the condition and whether it has its original parts. While an exact number is unknown, it's likely that the miniseries acquired hundreds of M1 Garands. They also purchased M1 carbines, M1903 Springfields, and World War II era pistols. Of course, they acquired German weapons as well, including Mauser K98K rifles, MP40 submachine guns, and Luger pistols. In addition to authentic weapons, 400 highly detailed rubber prop guns were also used, including pistols that looked like the real thing when holstered.
Whoa! Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Wow. I thought for sure that thing was made out of total metal. That's incredible.
Number 3. The deeper meaning behind Easy Company's motto, Currahee, that's not revealed in the series. The first episode of Band of Brothers, titled Currahee, finds the men of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, training at Camp Toccoa in Georgia, which is located not far from Currahee Mountain. Easy Company's commander, Captain Herbert Sobel, often makes the men run 3 miles up and 3 miles down Currahee. Their ability to conquer the painful run inspires them to use the mountain's name as Easy Company's motto and rallying cry. Like in the series, they could be heard shouting, Currahee. However, the series never reveals the deeper meaning of the word. Currahee is actually an American Cherokee Indian word that means stands alone or we stand alone, which symbolizes the resilience and unity of the paratroopers of Easy Company. Number 2. Dick Winters walked off the set of Band of Brothers. Did you know that Dick Winters abruptly walked off the set of the miniseries when he visited the production in England? But it's not because he was unhappy with what he was seeing. Shortly after he arrived on the set, he was taken to meet a group of actors who were in costume sitting in the back of a 2.5 cargo truck. When the canvas covering the back of the truck went up, Winters froze when he saw the men and his face went sheet white. He said something to producer Ivan Schwarz, who was standing next to him, and then he abruptly walked away, got in a car, and left the set, never to return. He would later say that looking at the young men in the back of that truck was like looking at a truck full of ghosts. This was due to how much the actors reminded him of the men he'd served with, many of whom never made it home from the war. Number 1. Dick Winters initially expressed some disappointment with regard to Band of Brothers. Despite Dick Winters being heavily involved in the book and even developing a bromance of sorts with author Stephen Ambrose, going as far to call Ambrose the leading historian of our time, and also placing a plaque over his door that read, "Steve Ambrose slept here," Winters' initial reaction to the HBO miniseries was less positive. Shortly after attending the premiere of Band of Brothers, producer Tom Hanks asked Winters what he thought. Winters answered, "I wish that it would have been more authentic. I was hoping for an 80% solution." Hanks told him, "Look, Major, this is Hollywood. At the end of the day, we would be hailed as geniuses if we get this 12% right. We are going to shoot for 17%, and if we succeed, you need to be satisfied." Fair enough, replied Winters, who seemed to accept Hank's argument. It didn't hurt that after its release, the series was a resounding success with both critics and viewers, making Dick Winters a household name. And despite its historical inaccuracies, Band of Brothers received widespread critical acclaim for its portrayal of World War II and would go on to win 6 Emmy Awards and the Golden Globe for Best Miniseries or Motion Picture made for television. Winters countered his initial negative comments about authenticity by praising the series' battle scenes, noting that they were depicted realistically without the Hollywood glamour treatment. He said his favorite part of Band of Brothers was the inclusion of the interviews with Easy Company veterans. He also felt that the series honored the collective heroism of Easy Company, cementing the legacy of the men. It's worth pointing out that while Band of Brothers is nowhere close to 80% accurate, it does stand above most other World War II movies and series in terms of authenticity, which is part of why it's been so successful.